In an effort to secure humanity's domination on the galactic front, our species would spread outwards towards the stars in hopes to become more than just a single planet-faring race. It, as always, was rather unknown what lies just beyond our solar system, so it was a little bit scary. While this information is incredibly sparse, at least concerning this game, and also very difficult to find, believe me on that, humanity would take to the stars where things would get a little complicated for Homo sapiens, but arguably, it may have been by our own hands. I know, right? Humans making things difficult on ourselves? How is that possible? With our species spreading quickly and dropping colony after colony on any available planet in the general area, eventually we would happen across a species that would be deemed absolutely abhorrent by our standards and by the standards and operating government of Super Earth. The Terminids, however, which is pretty ironic, it would appear as though at first they had no intentions of actually engaging in battle with humanity and were a relatively peaceful race. After several failed interactions of peaceful diplomacy, it was right around that time that humanity learned that they could actually produce a form of space oil that could be utilized in humanity's ships. This would result in a conflict with the species that would flare up over a century later again after some pretty horrific farms popped up. So in today's episode, let's be real here, there is almost absolutely zero lore on Helldivers and Helldivers 2. I mean, there is some, but the game plan here is to discuss what little I can find on the Terminids and get into their actual biology and their apparent sapience and why exactly they were such an adaptable race, or at least appear to be, because I believe it to be something completely different. This is going to require a lot of filling in the blanks, and I'm sure if you scroll down into the comments right now, everyone is calling me, disloyal or some nonsense like that, but to really understand the Terminids, you're gonna have to just listen to the heresy. So to start this off right, we need to understand what humanity was even doing during this time frame. And brother, we were stomping everything in the galaxy the second we ran across it, Roll Tide. During the events of the original Helldivers, there was a galactic war that took place, and well, there's not really any way around it. The entire thing was inspired by humanity in one way or another. It appears pretty much on brand with how our species is currently and explains why the government is as it is at this time frame. Now, my ship being called the Patriot of Patriotism indicates I am in fact a Chad, but that doesn't mean the government always makes the correct decisions. In fact, one could argue they rarely do. Humanity itself is number one, but those in charge might need a good deposing from time to time. But given humanity's warlike nature, if our species could not be united under the banner of extreme sense of duty and ultra patriotism to the ruling dictatorship of Super Earth, then it's likely humanity would have just filled the Sol system with war and completely flamed out after only a couple of decades. So prior to the Galactic War, somewhere along the line, humanity would form the government of Super Earth. It is unknown up to this point why exactly is referred to as Super Earth. However, all indicators of the symbols and the view of the actual planet would indicate it still is in fact Earth. Now, why again is it called Super Earth? Well, again, why is my ship the Patriot of Patriotism? Because we are all super stoked on Homo sapiens and our home world is basically the best place around. The leadership of Super Earth is considered to be a dictatorship under the guise of a managed democracy. Managed democracy being an automated form of voting that really just keeps the same group in power quite consistently. Heresy to suggest, I know, and the comments again are about to be filled with questioning my loyalty, but I didn't see you guys on Melvellen Creek. So get good. For a time, humanity would exist completely unchecked by any other opposition in the surrounding area. That is until 2084, and as it turns out, Orwell was not talking about 1984, but actually 2084. He was so close, but so far away with his guesstimate. As humanity continued to run across their first troublesome species, this would spark a rather bloody exchange initially for the other side. While the Terminids are known now to be quite violent and downright vicious, for a time they were peaceful with humanity. Deep lore suggests that they were quite content with their colonies and were not attempting to really engage in active combat with humanity. But as stated, the only good bug is a dead bug. Humanity would be disturbed collectively by the appearance of this race, which would inspire a massive conflict. As the Terminids began to realize these primates had no intentions of not attacking them, this in turn caused them to begin adapting and becoming just as bloodthirsty as humanity was. Now, you can call this adaptation, but really, any species that can conceptualize spreading beyond their borders or its own world already has a sense of abstract thought, which is exactly what humans have, and an instinct for self-preservation, which is exactly what humans have. So before moving on to how everything went to complete crap crap, let's discuss that for a minute. While looking at what the Terminids are now, it might be easy to think that they're just your standard animal that must be destroyed. However, this does not appear to be an actual reality of potentially what they are, or at least they were. It's important to understand that specifically with this race, there may have been a multitude of factors that led to what they are now after the First Galactic War, which we will discuss here in a moment. So first and foremost, the Terminids appear to be a hive mind sort of species, or at least eusocial. This indicates that they are much like the insects on Earth, as ants for example, which says to me there is likely an unseen controlling queen somewhere. This could be why at first the insects were rather peaceful towards humanity instead of outright attacking when the first few interactions went terrible for the race, because even though an individual bug got, the queen was still like, well, maybe it just went sour. So this, however, shows the issue of this degree of separation from those engaging in battle and those being controlled by the queen, or at least, again, presumed queen. Again, the lore is sparse, but if they behave and operate much like they do as any insectoid species on this planet, it's a logical conclusion to reach. Initially in 2084, when humans entered a full-on war with these creatures, it was a tempered response at first due to the influence of a leadership the bugs fell under. Now, that was because mostly they were willing to strike up a coexistence with the primates that likely looked a little strange to them, as strange as they looked to us. But the problem is, Homo sapiens on our own planet had to fight, claw, and bite our way to the top of the food chain, dealing with larger animals throughout our entire evolutionary past, which characterizes why we would see a larger alien species that really appears just like animals to us as a threat. By doing this, however, we would create a larger problem for ourselves beyond just the simple idea of, oh, they're just mad at us now, and I think I figured out why. Returning back to the lore for a moment before rounding it back to the Terminids, humanity would officially declare war on the bug menace, but not before realizing the bugs themselves could be turned into starship fuel. So planet by planet, humans would begin pushing back the bug race in an attempt to rid the galaxy of this terror, or at least that was the accepted explanation that was given out. And this was usually disseminated through like logs and videos and propaganda. It was around this time, however, that another faction would then join in on the First Galactic War, creating a double front issue for humanity. Way back in the day, colonists would be sent to a planet that was completely frozen and was essentially a complete hellscape. This insanely harsh world and the conditions that existed within would likely begin breaking down the people currently mining, which would at first likely necessitate like prosthesis limbs and a bunch of other things that would follow. As people continued to live there, more and more injuries due to either their exposures or accidents would in turn cause them to begin turning to metal as a way to bolster their systems in an effort to survive their environment that for all intents and purposes they were forced to reside in. You know, sort of like forced adaptation to a place that you really don't want to be at. Usually doesn't work out too well. But this would result in the first evidence of the cyborgs cropping up in the First Galactic War. Because of the vast distance between Super Earth and Cyberstan, as it was known, where the colonists were placed, they began to realize there was very little control being exercised over them. Seeing the war taking place on the other side of the galaxy and understanding Super Earth's attention was further diminished, they would declare independence from the ruling government. This would obviously enrage Super Earth's government, which they would then immediately declare war on the cyborgs, and they saw it as an abomination anyways, opening up a second front to the war. Interestingly, 100 years later, as humanity would engage in a faction that seemed to come out of nowhere, the automatons, as I write this a few days ago, they have turned away from heading towards Super Earth and instead are now headed towards Cyberstan. This may indicate that the cyborgs once living on that planet, after being pushed back to their home planet and then defeated, retreated even further past the edges of the galaxy, where their body modifications took on even more machine stature, completely removing their humanity and becoming the automatons. Which, if you would like to see a video on that, let me know. Again, not much lore, but it might be something I can put together in the future. And we are returning to the bugs here in a moment. I haven't forgotten. It's just important to kind of understand what humanity was doing and why this may have caused the Terminids to become the way that they are. It was around this time a third faction would get involved by complete accident. Known as the Illuminate, they came from a completely different area of the galaxy and had no idea humanity was currently going toe-to-toe with everything in sight. These amphibious people came from a planet that had quite a bit of water on it, but appears to be relatively shallow. Not much is known about this species apart from the fact that they were highly intelligent, and humanity actually in some ways wanted their advanced technology. As the Illuminate spread out from their home planet, much like the Terminids, it appears to have been through peaceful means. They really didn't want to just like go and attack everything. They had their own religion and psionics, and through this, their entire goal appeared to be converting other species to their religion by peaceful measures, but what they would be met with was absolute war. Humanity began seizing ships, claiming that they were carrying WMDs, and because of this, humanity would then go on to declare war on this third species, opening up a third front on the war. It's a good thing humanity loves reproduction, because this three-way meat grinder would become an absolute slog of attrition as humanity somehow managed to push back all three factions over time, securing human dominance in the galaxy at least for 100 years. The result of this was the cyborgs were pushed out of their home planet, to which they assumed they had been, absolutely defeated. So they were pretty much extinct. No more problems, right? We'll see. However, as the automatons push back towards Cyberstan currently, this may indicate that they were never extinct, just that their human portion is. The Illuminate completely disappeared after they lost their home planet, but what's interesting is there appears to be information surrounding that their fleet has been spotted. This would mean that they are still out there, and they are likely rather pissed over the events that have taken place. After 100 years, they may have reestablished themselves somewhere unseen by humanity, which in turn may explain what's going on with the Terminids. The Terminids, depending on who you ask, probably had it worse. Once being peaceful, the idea is that they adapted quickly and became as bloodthirsty as humanity. Now, the defense of their colonies and world does not really necessarily indicate that they are bloodthirsty, just like if humanity were to do the same, it would be more seen as heroic than anything. However, the species that humanity is fighting at this current point in time has changed into something they may have not been before, which has really left them as almost completely animals. First things first, the Terminids are a carbon-based life form, and much like Homo sapiens, we can assume there is likely genetic coding within them. They can reside on a very similar planets to humans as well, which means their metabolism is very likely oxygen-based. Now, there is this concept that I always have to go into, which is, well, Roanoke, how do you know that they're not just breathing another gas? And to answer this, it's actually quite easy. For any two species to exist within the same atmosphere together, there needs to be a similar mix of gas as the home planet that is tolerable for either species that is not native to this world. And again, the concept always comes back, well, how do we know that they're not breathing N2, which is nitrogen that is in Earth's atmosphere, which I believe is around like 78%, rather than just the oxygen that's in our atmosphere? And that's because nitrogen is triple bonded with each other, which makes it incredibly difficult to break, and any cell that was attempting to do that through metabolism is not going to get a lot of energy out of it because the energy has to put in to break those bonds. So again, there must be a similar mix of gas on the home planet that is tolerable for either species that is not native to the world that they are on then. With humans, again, Earth's atmosphere is 78.08% nitrogen and 20.95% oxygen, and roughly about 0.93% argon with other trace gases such as carbon dioxide. For humans to land on a planet and breathe the air and establish colonies the Terminids are on, then they must be compatible with this degree of oxygen. Now, this also hints at something else concerning their actual physiology concerning the Terminids. But it is important to remember that when you drop in, you are a soldier, so you have a helmet on. Now, these are all colonies of humanity, so I'm going to go ahead and assume they weren't constantly wearing rebreathers, or they didn't have helmets they had to wear all the time, and also basically the atmospheres would be compatible for human existence. So while they all appear to have a form of exoskeletal armor plating, internally, this would mean the Terminids must have a closed circulatory system much like humans have. The reasoning behind this is an open circulatory system would not allow for such large insects to form. Now obviously you're probably thinking to yourself, well, how do we know these planets just don't have more oxygen? They can't, because again, if humans can exist on a planet, then there must be a similar physical makeup or compositional makeup concerning the atmosphere. This is because of something known as oxygen toxicity. For humans, we cannot live in an environment of even 35% oxygen. Even at levels of 25%, this can begin to become harmful to us. At these levels, this can cause oxidative damage to the cell membrane, leading to the complete collapse of the alveoli in the lungs, resulting in you literally suffocating in a high oxygen environment. It's kind of ironic, really. This damage to the lungs will also cause bleeding rapidly, which will eventually end the person, as you can kind of also suffocate on your own blood. Now, the other side of that coin is this. An insect with an open circulatory system in an environment with high oxygen, it actually would fare rather well, and this would increase their stature quite dramatically, as seen on ancient Earth with centipedes that were over 6 feet long. Sign me up for a big mug of absolutely no thanks. You see my own biases here. In the immortalized words of Damon Baird, humans are hardwired to react to things that scuttle, and this is probably why intrinsically humans were completely disgusted by the Terminids. Anyhow, So highlighting the oxidative stress of high oxygen environments that would put on humans who lived on a planet obviously owned by the Terminids, this means the Terminids do not require high oxygen environments to grow into what they become. Because even further to this point, when the farms popped up, this continues to support the idea that metabolisms and oxygen distribution systems would have to be similar. A closed circulatory system would have other benefits to the Terminids as well, the largest one being they would be more intelligent than average. See, an open circulatory system as established, it would not be able to perfuse tissue with the oxygen required to allow humans to breathe, if it were just open in the Terminids, to effectively kind of create the size of the insects, but also the thinking capacity of these insects. But with a closed system, it's very likely they could do the same thing as with humans. This allows for an enclosed brain space, and with it, more neural connections that would be fueled by the oxygen necessary of a closed circulatory system, allowing, again, for more intelligent bugs. Sounds pretty horrifying, right? Well, that's because it is. By human standards, the Terminid race is considered to just be an animal, but that's not possible given their expansion across the galaxy and their propensity for peace. That would mean that concerning their neural abilities, like forethought and planning, they were in some ways on par with humanity. I mean, though they did indicate that they're were going to be a real threat to the human race once the gloves were off and they began to actively fight this aggressive race of primates. And during such events, this would cause many different variants of this bug to crop up, all being controlled. However, from what we can tell, they are all a quadrupedal race no matter what form they take. They will fall into several categories though, from what we have seen at least concerning recent events, as the scavenger, warrior, hunter, stalker, bile spewer, charger, bile titan, and brood commander. These are really the main foot soldiers for the Terminid race and were born out of the adaptations in the First Galactic War and have continued on into the current conflict. However, I think we are missing something, which is a leader. Again, like with most eusocial insects that are considered to be a hive mind, there is typically going to be the top bug, which is usually a queen. The queen, dictating what is happening across several planets that they exist on, would engage with humanity in war, but something appears to have happened. Whether the queen was taken out or escaped is completely unknown, and we are treading into some major assumptions here just as a heads up. With the queen potentially having retreated, removing a large portion of the direction, really just leaving it to the brood commanders and the standard intelligence that the Terminids had, this resulted in what we humanity are fighting currently, or were fighting, by our own hands. At the conclusion of the First Galactic War, again, it was discovered that the Terminids could create space oil for our ships. Referred to as Element 710, this would be invaluable for human expansion, but would require the subjugation and harvesting of potentially a sapient race, which, I mean, is arguably a little messed up, but this sapiens may have been reliant upon input from the queen, so the Terminids are bust down to sentience rather than sapience. And this is where the absolute state of aggression comes from. Well, from 2 points of issues, I suppose. The first is these farms were created and were likely for the explicit purpose of creating as many bugs as possible to harvest for Element 710. Likely, as with any species, overbreeding anything will begin to affect the genetics of that animal. This will amplify both good and bad attributes of any type of animal. With the Terminids, this overbreeding due to the desire to obtain more Element 710 may have been what made them more aggressive, as it amplified their ability to do that already. It may also have made them larger but decreased intelligence, resulting in them becoming more animalistic compared to what they used to be. As the lines accelerated and likely were grown faster, this would also begin to create different versions of the Terminids, which would later we would have to go on to fight in the human Terminid War that would follow up 100 years later in 2184 during the events of Helldivers 2, which, by the way, if you are still fighting the Terminids, for the love of God, go fight the automatons already. So as the Terminid species numbers kind of began to build back up because we were allowing it to build back up, a critical issue would follow. Somehow, inexplicably, they were able to begin jumping worlds. Now the question is, how? Headcanon says that the illuminate are actually back, and I think it hinges on a queen being out there. At some point, it went from the bugs being on the farm, not making any gains for, again, about 100 years, to all of a sudden they are now organized and are planet hopping, taking over human worlds. I believe at some point, when the illuminate retreated from the galaxy, they ran across the queen, who was probably just as pissed as they were. An alliance would be struck up from here. The illuminate would then get the queen back in close enough to control the Terminids on the farms, and the illuminate would then begin dropping Terminids onto human-controlled worlds. However, they would need to wait until the numbers were built up enough from the farms breeding Terminids until the time was right for the attack. It may also be that the 100-year lull gave the illuminate time to interact with the cyborgs as well, who also retreated out of their systems to the fringes of the galaxies, where the illuminate would supply them with the technology necessary to completely forsake their human form form, completely leave it behind, and become fully machine. All of this has basically opened up another, at least for now, 2-war front for humanity, with, I believe, a third front coming very soon because, well, I mean, honestly, once the automatons get to Cyberstan, I think that's where a bunch of crap's gonna go down and the Illuminate are gonna show back up, but that's just my own headcanon. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. Do you believe their survivability and adaptability may have come from the fact that they were just simply overbred, or do you think it's more intrinsic to their own biology when dealing with humans? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed, then leaving a like would be greatly appreciated, and subscribing is a great way to stay up to date on when I post. Also, if this video does well, which I don't really know, it's honestly kind of treading out a little bit from what I normally do, I may consider going over the automatons and cyborgs and their relationship a little more in depth next time, but again, the lore is sparse and a lot of assumptions had to be made on context clues. Anyhow, I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, and Roanoke Tales channel link in the description for anybody interested. Where this week, we're actually talking about a bridge that allegedly has had over 600 dogs just leap from it for some reason. It's very strange. But anyhow, speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, huge thank you to our astrophysicist, Death's Dancer. Thank you, man. Next up, I'd like to thank our scientist, Chad the Enjoyer of explanations of B-grade horror movies, Dakota23, Jax, Josh Blanchard, Lucian Dragon, Metric System, and Trash Panda in a trench coat. Thank you, guys. And to the rest of my patrons, your support is greatly appreciated, and it helps keep this channel running, so thank you. All right, that's gonna do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and we'll see y'all in the next one.